Hey guys, this is Greg Walker, the Wolf Baby, coming at you for First Chance. This is podcast number 2. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Mr. Clint Davis. Thank you for being here, man. A good friend of mine, former military, also now one of the best licensed therapists in the area. Man, I love him. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we get going, though, I'd like to remind you that First Chance is a nonprofit, and we want to give our time to you to train you in trauma care, meaning how to use a tourniquet, how to use hemostatic gauze in the case of an active shooter or high stress event. So you can look us up on Facebook, and that's First Chance, or yourfirstchance@gmail.com. All right, here we go. My buddy Clint Davis, I'm glad you're here, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Man, to start off, I mean, just tell us where you're from, how you got here. Tell me about your military stuff, and then how it led you into this.
Yeah, so I'm from Alexandria area, DeVille, Louisiana, so I'm a good country boy from out there. And
Right.
I was, kind of born into a family that had some issues, mental health issues. My parents ended up divorcing when I was really young. Kind of got into a lot of trauma in my own childhood, whether that was sexual or physical or emotional. I ended up joining the military at 17. Second week of basic training was 9/11. So I was on the rifle range at Fort Leonard Wood in the Army, and
Right.
9/11 happened. And
How old were you when you went in?
17.
17,
Yep.
okay.
And
Yeah.
so I then left Fort Leonard Wood, was a combat engineer, ended up in Afghanistan the next year, and came back from Afghanistan. It was kind of a mess, was dealing with PTSD and
Right.
trauma responses, and started drinking and drugging and doing everything I could do to cope with it. And then a couple years later, Hurricane Katrina happened, and so I ended up down in the Superdome for Hurricane Katrina.
Right. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, we were first responders, and we were the ready reaction team for Louisiana at the time, and so we went down there, and we had actually been down there about 2 weeks earlier for another hurricane, and we thought, we'll go down there and nothing will happen like it always is. And,
Right.
And so we started letting people in the Superdome and doing our typical security stuff, and then when Katrina hit, all hell broke loose, and
Right.
we had about 30,000 people in there with us and about 250 of us. And so,
That's overwhelming.
for 7 days,
That's
it was
crazy.
just name something that humans can do to each other, and people were doing it,
Right.
fight or flight, and couldn't get out, and couldn't get, lost their homes, lost their money, lost their lives, lost family members, couldn't find family members.
Right.
So it was just chaos. So when I came back from there, got back into therapy myself, and that's when God just kind of told me, hey, you need to start working on this. You could do this for other people.
Right.
And so over the course of 3 or 4 years, got my bachelor's in psychology. And when I got done, I said, well, I need more. So I went and got a master's in Los
Right.
Angeles, and then moved back here and kind of started working for other people. And
So that's the long short of it.
yeah.
Yeah. One thing I like about Clint is that, man, you have that experience from PTSD, and a lot of law enforcement guys and military guys have it and deal with it, or think they're dealing with it, or not dealing with it at all.
Sure.
And that's what, one thing I want to talk about today is a little bit about mental health, and that one thing that we don't get a lot of in law enforcement, and I would even say, I don't know, I've never been in the military, I couldn't go in because I had asthma, but I would assume that we don't really deal with that the way we should properly.
Yeah.
I know from the law enforcement standpoint, I mean, that, every day you get up and, put your stuff on and go out there and, your first 5 calls may be nothing, but your last 3 of the day can be crazy, weird, and when I say crazy weird, I mean, dealing with people that, they're basically 50-year-old children. And,
Well, you're dealing with a culture that also doesn't deal with trauma, that doesn't get therapy. So you're dealing with a culture of people who have unresolved trauma, mental illness. They're not rational. They're using all kinds of things like drugs and alcohol and prostitution and trafficking and all these things to cope with their own issues.
Right.
And then they run into you, who's trying to protect and serve and keep us safe. And it's, chaos.
Yeah, and it's straight chaos.
Yeah.
And then,
And you're going to get up the next day and it's going to be another day of chaos.
That's right, and a lot of guys and women, they don't deal with that. They don't deal with their
Right.
mental health status. And
Well, yeah, and I think it's a microcosm of the macrocosm of our culture. Nobody's dealing with mental health very well. So definitely these these smaller groups of military, first responders, fire department, police, all these things, they need to be the first ones getting taken care of and getting supported, and most of the time they're the last ones.
Sure, and I find that most of the people that we deal with, we kind of, it's weird because when you first start in law enforcement, they tell you that you're going to laugh at things or make comments about things that you just wouldn't normally do before you got in this profession, and those that hear you say that don't understand what's going on. And I remember hearing that and going, well, I don't really get that.
Yeah.
But I remember the first time I saw now I'd been to funerals and things, but the first time I actually saw a mutilated dead body because a homeless guy fell asleep on the train tracks and got ran over, and I had to go over there and process that and work that and look at that. I wasn't used to that. And
Of
then,
course not.
Yeah, and that increases. But the deal is, when I was there, I guess my point is that a veteran, he had been, 20 some odd years, he had showed up as well, and him and another guy, not this is bad. This is just how them coping was talking about, how good looking his shoes looked, and there were jokes that I didn't quite get, but I understand now, and that was them coping with what was going on.
Yeah, we
You know what I mean?
deflect.
Yeah.
We have to minimize things so we can survive.
Right.
And first responders, especially military, you don't have a choice to feel all your feelings,
No.
to process it all out every day, because you got to get up and do the next thing, or you got to go to the next call, or you got to function at a high level. And so it's such a fine balance of taking care of yourself. I would say at least weekly, every other week, with a therapist or somebody who's a mental health professional, to keep a steady mindfulness of what's going on with you, so you don't end up tipping, right? Because so many times we see that lead to severe drug use, ethical violations, physical violations, suicide. It ends up, there's going to be a little of that because you're in a broken world and you're in a broken system. Like, nobody can be a first responder in military. You're living with life and death on a daily basis. Nobody can be perfectly mentally healthy
Right.
and differentiated
Sure.
and do that job.
I understand.
But you can do it a lot better for yourself, so that when you retire, when you take a weekend break, when you go on vacation, it's a healthier transition.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because if you look at statistically, like police officers that retire, they usually, and it's not long after they retire. It's anywhere from 2, 5 to 8 years. Heart attack, stroke, they have diabetes, all these things. And most, you can attribute to a diet, but it's not just diet, it's mental.
Yeah, and so what I would say is that's kind of like, we have the ACEs scores, what is your adverse childhood effects. And there's about 10 of them. It's things like incarceration from a parent, drug use, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, all these things that then lead to COPD, heart disease, mental health issues, early death. Well, that's from childhood trauma. But as police officers and first responders, it's like you're a child in a system, a family system, all the time, seeing and feeling and experiencing trauma.
Right.
So if you don't deal with the systemic consequences of being around that trauma, even if that trauma isn't directly happening to you, although it does, then yeah, it's going to come out 20, 10, 30 years later, and you're not going to get to enjoy your retirement. You're not going to enjoy your
And it
family.
does, man. It really does. I see the one thing about the mental part is that, and what I wanted to say earlier was, you said retirement, and made me think about it, but a lot of guys don't do the mental thing. But what I see is because, I've even been told this, that, hey, you're tough. You're supposed to push through that and go on to the next deal. Hey, this is the tough deal. You just got to suck that up and go on about your business.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that's dangerous. I mean, in all honesty, it's dangerous. Not even just for a law enforcement person, for, people who have,
Well, that teaches people pride.
Right.
And what I mean is that pride is saying, I got this. And I think as a man, like the men that I respect the most are the humble men. The ones that say, I don't have this. I need support. I need help. I need accountability. I need to be vulnerable. And we screw it up by saying, like, being vulnerable is weak. And that's a survival mind state. I mean, if you're vulnerable, you're going to get hurt. But the reality is that it's way easier to shove all your emotions down and not talk about things than it is to talk about them. So if strength is doing the hard thing, then I would assume that being strong is actually being a man who's willing to talk about it, willing to process it, willing to be honest about their feelings.
Sure.
That doesn't mean not sucking it up and pushing forward, but it means while you're pushing forward and while you're still doing your job, you have integrity and congruence in how you think and how you feel. And if somebody looked at you and said, why'd you do this? You would be able to go, well, I did this for this, I processed this out, and I made this decision based on what was best for me and the community. Not, well, I did it in the moment because I was just functioning and surviving and reacting.
Right. I'm telling you, you see it every day, and especially when you're working on it yourself. Not that you're better than anybody else, but I do see it in other people where they're not working that out.
Yeah,
it's like running what they do. It's making their decisions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure. And again, I think judgment or worth and value, like those are all things to define and talk about, because I think everybody on earth has intrinsic worth and value. That no matter how good you are at your job, or how better you are with dealing with trauma, or how more resilient you are because of your training, you only are like that because of your story. And we don't need to judge people as groups. We don't need to look at cops and go, well, all cops are this way, or all firemen are this way. We need to get in a relationship with people and go, tell me your story. How do you cope with the day? How do you need to work? Like, not everybody needs to meditate every day.
That's right.
Do I suggest it? Yes. But some people like to work out. Some people like to run. Some people like to watch their diet. Some people like to swim. Some people like to listen to music. But if it's congruent with you and it's leading to health, then you got to find your thing.
Right.
But you can't find that thing until you admit there's a problem and maybe I'm not as on top of things as I thought I was.
Right. And one thing I want to tell these, I know I've already said, but I want to say it again, that what I love about you is that Clint's been there. I mean, you've been to Afghanistan, you know about combat. I mean, he knows that you were in, again, you said that you were in Hurricane Katrina. That whole thing was a mess. So it's not like you don't know what's going on, what you had to climb out of yourself.
I've seen dead bodies and death and combat and been shot at.
Because there are some people that are going to watch. I mean, there are people that are watching this that are civilians, no doubt. And,
sure.
And nothing against civilians per se. I don't mean it that way, but that they're dealing with what they're dealing with. But from the law enforcement standpoint, if you're watching, it is important that you develop that mental health. It really does. It's going to help you with decision making, your day-to-day grind, with your family, all those things.
I mean, it leads to better income outcomes. It leads to, you make more money when you're more mentally, emotionally intelligent.
Right. And also, when you're talking about, when we're talking about First Chance and we're training people in stress management, that's basically what it is that, you hit that time where, take El Paso, you're in the Walmart and some, idiot comes in and starts, killing folks with a long rifle or whatever, and you make a decision right there. Let's say you're going to act. Well, in my opinion, and in teaching, and in being in crazy stuff, if your mental health is there and you have a little bit of that training, you go into action, you can think clear when you're working on your mental health. And that's why I'm talking about this.
No, for sure. And I've worked with plenty of cops who have been in shootings and situations, and veterans who have been in shootings, and when they weren't healthy and they made decisions on the spot, they're living with those decisions for years and years afterwards because maybe they didn't make the right decision.
Sure.
Or maybe they look back and they feel ashamed because even if they made the right decision, they know they hadn't really thought through it and planned for it and made it congruent. And one way or another, you got to deal with it. So you want to be healthy, you want to work through your stuff, you want to be insightful about your emotions, and that gives you so much strength. So if you do get in that situation and you make a decision, you have to make a life or death situation. Afterwards you go, well, whether that's right or wrong, I made it with the best options and the most information that I had available, and now I can live with myself afterwards.
Sure.
And then if I'm recovering and in therapy and working through PTSD from a shooting or from violence or whatever, then it all kind of gels together and you recover much quicker.
Right.
You get back to work.
Well, you made me think about two things. The first question is, what are some, so I know it's probably broad, and I don't want to be vague, but yet on the other side, I'm going to ask this a certain way and just answer the best way you can, is that if you've been involved, for those guys that are in law enforcement or military and they've been in a situation where they've had to take a life or it has become violent, what are some signs that they might see? And then what are some steps, besides just maybe calling your office, which we'll talk about that in a minute, but some things they can identify with, something you can tell them, hey, if you're doing this, you're doing this. And I know not everybody has the same common signs, but maybe there's something,
Well, I mean, if you've been in a shooting, you've 100% suffered a traumatic event, and anything that's not nurturing is traumatic. And what I mean by that is, just because something bad happens and there's conflict doesn't mean it's going to ruin the rest of your life and your functioning.
Sure.
But how traumatic it is does determine how much your brain needs to recover from it.
Right.
And you're either going to you're going to be overstimulated where every situation is triggering you and upsetting you, or you're going to numb out where you have no emotions. And the problem with numbing out is that you don't just numb bad emotions, you numb all the good emotions too. So you stop finding pleasure in things you used to like. You start being irritable and irritated and short-tempered and short-sighted in your future. You stop being able to plan. You start isolating yourself from others. You start being more violent and more prone to fits of rage. I mean, those are some things that I see happen when people experience trauma. Some of the symptoms are flashbacks, replaying the event over and over in your mind, having trouble sleeping, people, places, and things you avoid that remind you of that. Maybe you don't go to that area anymore, or maybe you're super angry at this type of person or this gender or this ethnicity for a while because of this circumstance that happened.
Right.
And it, trauma affects the brain. So, your right brain is your emotions and your thoughts and your feelings, and your left brain is logical thinking. And when trauma happens, your right brain gets so overstimulated that your prefrontal stops working, and so your logic doesn't work.
Sure.
Now, it makes rational sense to the person who's been through the trauma because they experienced that in the past, but in the context, it might not be rational. And so you feel kind of crazy. People look at you like you're crazy. You respond over the top or way under the top, like the guy's laughing at the homeless guy. Like, that's a very traumatic response.
Sure.
Like, you've desensitized yourself so much to it so you can function and survive.
Sure.
Or it's the person who you get there and you start hyperventilating and you feel overstimulated. Well, either way, like, are you going to be able to shoot and protect and do all the things that you need to do well? Overstimulated, you're not. Understimulated, the consequences later. So overstimulated, you're going to be in a firefight or in a situation or trying to handcuff somebody or put them in a car, and you're going to be riled up and upset, and it's going to make the whole thing go chaotic.
Sure.
Or understimulated, it goes well, you feel emotionless to it, but then afterwards, there's this storehouse of emotions that you've never dealt with, and it's going to come out one way or the other.
Right.
Typically on yourself, on a spouse, on a kid.
Right. And how varied is, okay, because I heard this before. This is the second question about PTSD. Is there one PTSD, or is PTSD it's a wide range of emotions and feelings? Because some trauma to some people is not trauma to others.
No, for sure not.
Right?
So the thing is, you have to fit the DSM criteria, which is what I was listing off, to get a PTSD diagnosis.
Sure.
But there are a bunch of other diagnoses and like labels for trauma. So you can have adjustment disorder. You can have those are just labels that they put on it. But my thing is it affecting your life in a negative way to where you can't function and you're not happy and the people around you are not happy?
Sure.
Then who cares what label you put on it?
Sure.
You have trauma and you need to deal with it to where you can get to a functional place. You can feel freedom and peace. You can feel like the people around you, friends, family, feel freedom and peace.
Sure.
So that's the answer to, I think, the diagnosis piece, is that it doesn't really matter to me what label you put on it. It's just that you acknowledge that this has been a traumatic event. The other thing is, I would say, my favorite analogy is you're in a group therapy session and everybody's sitting in a circle. And you would never do this, obviously, ethically, but you tell everybody, tell me the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And as a cop and as a veteran, people do this all the time, right? They're like, oh, you shoot anybody lately? Or did you kill anybody? It's the worst thing that somebody can do because it's making you recall the worst moment in your life. Like, you would never tell somebody, hey, tell me about your rape.
Yeah, you would. Yeah.
Right, but people,
that's crazy.
But
That
people
would be
do
crazy.
it all the time when it comes to firemen and cops and first responders, and so you're in this group therapy session and you tell everybody, hey, let's all tell the worst thing that's ever happened to us. And you got a veteran and a cop and a firefighter and an older guy and different people from different walks of life. And right next to me, this little 16-year-old girl. And we go around and people were telling. Some people were kind of upset and irritated. Some people were tearing up a little bit. Some people were getting really, frustrated, and they're telling all these war stories, these awful situations. This little girl's sitting next to me shaking and crying. I'm like, oh, everybody's kind of looking at her like she's falling apart. And she gets to her and she says, the worst thing I ever had to do was carve the turkey in front of my family for Thanksgiving. Now everybody looks at her and is seeing the same biological, emotional response to this trauma based on her life and her family system, what she's been through. That was the worst, and it gave her the same symptoms.
Right.
So you can't measure traumas against trauma.
Sure.
Because you don't know that person's life, and you don't know their story, and you don't know their resiliency and their biology. And if you have been through a lot and you've worked through it, you typically can handle a lot more than other people. So you go to a shooting, if you've handled it correctly, then you understand how the world works and what your belief systems are on violence
Sure,
and what your belief
sure.
system is about God and about death and why good things happen or bad things happen to good people and all these questions that people ask me on a daily basis. If you understand all that and you've processed it, it doesn't mean that trauma doesn't make you sad, but it doesn't derail you and give you all these symptoms.
Right.
Most of the time it's the first time somebody's ever experienced it based on their life and their circumstances. Depends on how much that sends you over the edge.
Sure.
But that's not about like you're stronger than this person. It's about your experience of life is much different.
And I think people tend to do that from an insecure type
For sure.
level. Hey, you know, mine is better, or mine is, when really it's not. I mean,
Well, we measure it against worse traumas. So as a veteran, I did this for a long time. Like, oh, I went in special forces. I don't need a PTSD diagnosis. Like, there's no, you know, I didn't get in 15 firefights. I didn't kill a bunch of people. So I don't deserve that. But if I measure it against what God intended, which is me not killing anyone, me not seeing anyone die, me not having any violence in my life,
Sure.
then that gap's huge.
Right.
Same thing with childhood stuff. Like, oh, my dad never beat me or put me in a closet. Okay. But did he tell you he loved you? Did he hug you? Did he spend time with you?
Right.
Because that's what you deserved.
Right.
So we have to stop measuring traumas against other traumas and against worse traumas and start going, okay, let me look at my life and let me look at like what I would want for my children and a person in my life, and where's the gap? Because if there's a gap, then you need to deal with that and stop minimizing it by either saying it wasn't bad enough,
Sure.
or looking at somebody else and saying, oh, you know, they should do better because I went through this and I didn't do all that stuff.
Right. I mean, man, I hope that people watching this know that if any of this is coming up while they're, you know, looking at this, that they can get in touch with you. I'm kind of going to go back to the beginning.
Yeah,
On your website, it says this: I'm a counselor, therapist who is passionate about helping people heal and grow in mind, body, and spirit. I'm trained in marriage and family therapy, addiction, trauma recovery, and spiritual issues. And I wanted to bring this up because you're not just this is what I love about you, Clint, is that you're not just the clinical psychologist that you go and talk to, but that you understand the spiritual part is a big part of the mental, because even science shows that in high stress situations, so they've done studies, right? So in one of the studies, and a book was written about it in the 90s called Sharpening the Warrior's Edge, and they took thousands of combatants in law enforcement, and they all put them in these situations where, you know, they had to make split decisions to kill someone or to go hand-on-hand violence, or, you know, even minor things where they were answering a call and it was just an argument.
Right.
And one thing they said, and this is scientists, this has nothing to do with religion,
Right.
but a scientist said, and this was number 4, they said that your spiritual life has to be together if you're going to manage the mental part, the stress that's given out in these career fields.
Sure.
And so one thing I love about you, and you said it 2 or 3 times here, and that is about God. And that's what I was going to read here on one of your posts. And this is awesome, dude. I love this. And then on the post, you can see it on Instagram. It's got a lady with a shark in front of her. And it's true. You know, if you look at that shark, there are a lot of things that we face, right? And it says this, and this is perfect. It says our human instinct is to avoid hurts and fears. We tend to turn from them and run. The problem is that they always seem to catch us and then surprise us when their tenacity is at the wrong time. We challenge you to face your fears, to turn into your struggles and allow the hope of Jesus and the power of integrative therapy to help you look those fears in the eye. Facing our struggles, hurts, and fears is the only chance we have to escape the future, present, mental, and spiritual attacks. Hashtag mindful counselor, hashtag mental health matters. I mean, y'all need the hashtag. I mean, you know what I mean? Sure. So, in here it says that also that I work with couples, individuals, or families struggling with anxiety, depression, anger management, or relational conflict. I'm trained as a certified sex addiction therapist and EMDR to help recover from traumatic events. Man, I'm telling you right now, the EMDR deal that's a big deal. I mean, honestly, this stuff works. You know, I've been through that before, the EMDR program. Dude, it works. I'm telling you right now, it works. And that's one thing I like about your program, is that just like the book or the scientists studied and said scientifically, man, your spiritual life has to be together. You know, of course they comment whatever that is, but that's what, you brought that up.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so much of to nerd out for a second, like in the 20th century, we basically, all science said that there is no soul, there is no spirit, right? There is no mind, there's just the brain and the body, and we're meat machines.
Right.
In the 21st century, we realized like, oh, there's a lot of things we can't measure and we can't figure out, and spirituality's become more of a bigger thing again.
Sure.
And for me, when it comes down to it, it's about your beliefs shaping your thoughts and feelings, which shape your actions. And for hundreds of years, we've only focused on behavior modification. We're going to punish a person, or if you do these things, or you go to 12 steps. And again, those things are important. But if you don't go down to what do you believe about yourself, about God, about others, then in a crisis, in a stressful situation, your behavior modification doesn't last. It doesn't work, and it doesn't change who you are in your heart. And so in the Christian belief, it's, you have worth and value intrinsically because God loves you, and because you have worth and value because of what Jesus did. And that's the thing about the Christian religion, is that it's the only one that's not works-based. You can't do anything to earn health or earn salvation or deserve good things. You get them because God says that He loves you, and I think that's an important part of what we do in our practices, is allowing people to organically figure out what they believe about themselves, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or a mixed bag of things, or Islam or whatever. Like, it's not my job to tell you what to believe.
Sure.
But it is my job to go, your mind, body, and spirit are all one.
That's right.
And how are you being congruent with what you believe? So if you believe in Islam, how does that play out into your family and your parenting and your life and your job? If you believe in Buddhism or Christianity, how does that play out? I mean, I have a belief stance, and sometimes people ask me, and I'll say, well, here's one of the options. This is what we believe as Christians.
Sure.
It's biblical. You can take it or leave it. But you not knowing is a problem.
It is, and it's scientifically proven.
Right.
Because those under stress that don't have that figured out, or I wouldn't say figured out because you're always growing,
Sure.
but that's not nailed down.
Stability.
Yeah, statistically, they don't do well. I mean, in all honesty. And
Well, because your belief is shaping everything in your life.
Sure.
So if you've been through trauma and your belief is that God doesn't care, there is no God, how do you recover from biology, spiritual warfare that goes on, to believe differently? To believe I am going to be safe again, even though this happened. You
Sure.
get in a car wreck, a really bad, tragic car wreck, I can show you the statistics of the likelihood of you ever getting in a really traumatic car wreck again. It's pretty slim to none. But you're not going to believe it.
Sure.
And you're going to respond every time you drive like there's another car wreck coming around the corner.
Right.
Without belief in that there's goodness that can happen, and there's safety that can happen, and that this didn't happen to me because I'm bad, your assumption and your reactions are going to be out of fear all the time.
Right.
So you can't recover from fight or flight because you're still living from this fear mind state of something bad's going to happen to me because I deserve it.
Man, all that is wisdom, straight out. Man, tell these guys that that are watching if they need something, or they know a friend, or how they can get in touch with you, and where you're at, how they can find you.
So we're at 520 Olive Street right now. We're about to open a new treatment center. It's going to be Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness. It's going to be over by Ashley Ridge. It's 670 Albemarle. That'll open in October. We're going to have kind of the first holistic care center in Shreveport. So we'll have massage therapists, craniosacral therapists, homeopathic care, yoga, about 10 trained licensed professionals, an ABA who works with Asperger's and autism. And so we're trying to give Shreveport and Bossier a place where people can go and take care of their whole body, their whole mind, their whole spirit, and
That's
their whole
great,
body.
man.
Yeah,
That's
so
great.
we refer to doctors and MDs. We refer to workout centers like D1 or Anytime Fitness or ChristFit Gym, and we try to how can we as a community see people holistically and treat them as their whole self, and not just say, oh, well, I'm going to treat you in this way and then leave you to the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so you can get a hold of us at clintdaviscounseling.com. You can go visit our Facebook page. It's Clint Davis Counseling. We post stuff every day, every week about all of this, so people can take their time with it, watch a video, read a blog, kind of personalize it, and then get help. Our number is 318-562-6903. And Susan will help you, get set up with a therapist. We have 10 or 11 people from different ethnicities and backgrounds and ages and genders, And so you can get online and kind of look at the staff and see who you think will fit you best, or you can leave it up to us and we'll kind of clinically, depending on what you're dealing with. But everybody's trained in trauma, everybody's trained in EMDR. So we can deal with the general stuff, but then we're always looking to get to the root so that, we stop letting external things dictate internal work and pattern.
Right. That's awesome, dude. And guys, those of you that are fellow LEO or military and you're going through anything, man, I highly suggest talk to Clint, or even if you're not and your family member is, or they're having a hard time dealing with something, give him a shout, dude. He's great. They're state of the art, and I can't believe we have you here in Shreveport, man.
Appreciate
You think
it.
you'd be in a big city like San Francisco or Dallas or something. But before we get finished, I really wanted to talk about this, so I kind of saved this for the end, is that I know you do jiu-jitsu, and those people that know me know that, I like to fight sports itself. Not necessarily because of the violence per se, even though I think that's cool, but I think that you can apply that science, because it is a science,
Sure.
to actual life. And I know you do jiu-jitsu, and I like this right here, dude. I had to pull this out, bro. And didn't you just get your blue belt?
I'm working on it.
Oh, you're working on your blue belt? Yeah, so jiu-jitsu is a great way to deal with trauma and stay healthy. Come check us out, man. At Gator Pit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gator Pit, man. What do you think? Man, this is what I think. Tell me what you think real fast, and, we'll wrap it up. But the one thing I know about, like, whether it be Muay Thai or jiu-jitsu, I find that in those, you can apply those same things to life.
Yeah, for sure.
Positions, there's always a counter for something else, right?
There's always a way out.
Right.
Yeah, Jesus tells us that too, that he won't tempt you more than, you can be tempted without a way out.
Right.
And I think for me, jiu-jitsu, again, I'm just a lovely white belt, so I don't know.
Oh, that don't matter, man. You're doing the jiu-jitsu. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but, first of all, it's community. The guys at Gator Pit for me are good friends now,
Right.
family.
Right.
You have that same kind of feel of law enforcement or police officers or military that I've missed. And so it's a great group of people to connect with, good camaraderie. And there's just the physical connection. I think for guys and humans in general, physical connection is super important, and not in a sexual way or not in a inappropriate way, but physical, intimate connection is super valuable.
Sure.
And so when you're grappling and you're both working together in a common goal, for jiu-jitsu, it's like we're training so that if this bad guy comes, we can work. We're not fighting each other. We're not trying to beat each other, at least where we're at Gator Pit. It's very Gracie jiu-jitsu driven.
Right.
We're under Hickson and Chrome Gracie, and John Blunchy and Monroe, and Brian Andrews is our instructor. And so, they focus a lot on self-defense and taking care of yourself. And so that's a very good way to think about life, is how am I healthy so when things happen, I'm ready to
I agree with you,
react,
man.
but not in an aggressive way.
Yeah.
Not in a way that's I'm going to hurt somebody or trying to hurt somebody, but I'm trying to be in control of the situation. I'm confident in what I can do so I can react in the moment, not in fight or flight, not out of fear, but out of instinct. And I think that's so important emotionally as well. And so it's important because when you do jiu-jitsu too, you get put in these life or death situations in a way that you can't do in any other way that's not super traumatic.
It's true.
So when you're about to get choked out or armbarred or something, and you're in fight or flight, practicing and learning how to respond appropriately out of that situation, for me, helps me deal with my mental health.
No, I agree with you, yeah.
Because while I'm there, I think of nothing else.
That's right.
I can work out, I can run, but I'm always thinking about clients and my life and how I need to be better and what I need to do. When I'm at jiu-jitsu, it's an hour and a half
dude.
where I don't think about zilch.
Well, when you're in the jits, man, and you're on the mat, and you're trying to think ahead, because that's the strategy, right? So I'm trying to think the next two moves that will get me ahead of you, and you're doing the same thing. We're trying to work.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking about anything else but that.
Yeah, man.
That time, and that applies to life.
Exactly.
It really does. In my life, it has. Thinking ahead, how the OODA loop, as they talk about, all that. It sharpens all of it. I think that you can apply those fight sports, that science, into mental health.
Sure. And I think, just like anything, if you don't train your mental health, you don't train your emotional intelligence in the moment when all these emotions are flying around and all this chaos is flying around, you're not going to be very good at it. Just like jiu-jitsu. You can't go once every 2 months and expect to do anything when you go.
That's right, man. You're going to get choked out like all the time.
Yeah. I get choked out all the time anyway.
Well, yeah, that's just part of learning.
Yeah.
I understand.
But that's the humility that it brings, right? When earlier when I was talking about pride, one thing about jiu-jitsu is no matter how big and strong and jacked up you are, if you're not good at technique, nothing
That little dude
matters.
choke you out.
Yeah,
I
you're
mean, it's
done.
just- yeah, dude.
And so being able to sit in that and tolerate that I can't do anything to be better other than do the next right thing is a good mental thing for all of us to learn and find humility. So,
I think it is too, man. Hey, thanks for being here.
yeah, brother.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, man.
Hey, man, thanks. Check us out at First Chance. Again, if you need anything, give us a shout. You can inbox us. We'll be glad to help you out. Peace, baby.